The whiskey bottle felt cold in my hands. A peace offering from the son I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. I'm a retired engineer. A man who believes in logic, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth. This wasn't a gift. It was a murder weapon. And I wasn't the intended victim anymore. This story is about betrayal of the deepest kind. If you believe that truth must always come to light, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The morning of my 68th birthday began with the smell of cedar and the low hum of the dehumidifier in my workshop. It's a sound I've come to associate with peace, a constant in a life where so much has become variable. Outside, the Ohio sky was a flat, washed-out gray, the kind that promises a quiet day. For a retired engineer, a quiet day is a good day. It means order, predictability. I ran my hand over the half-finished rocking horse on my workbench. The wood was smooth as silk under my calloused fingers. It was for my granddaughter's 5th birthday next month. My son Caleb's daughter. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. A faint bitterness pricked at the back of my throat. A taste as familiar as my morning coffee. My gaze drifted to the old daughter Eta, faded photograph tacked to the wall. It was of my wife, Martha, and a much younger Caleb, maybe 10 years old, grinning with a gap in his teeth, his arms slung around her shoulders. We were at Cedar Point. The sun was bright, and life was simple. Martha had been gone 5 years now. The silence she left behind was a physical presence in the house. A guest that never left. The silence from Caleb. That was different. That was a choice. His choice. 3 years of it. The sudden, sharp ring of the doorbell cut through the quiet hum of the workshop. It was jarring. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping the fine layer of sawdust from my hands onto my jeans, I walked through the house. The delivery driver, a young kid with headphones around his neck, handed me a long, rectangular box. "Happy birthday," I guess he said, pointing at the happy birthday sticker slapped crookedly on the brown cardboard. I gave him a small, tired smile and took the package. It was heavy, solid. I closed the door and carried it to the kitchen island. My curiosity piqued. I looked at the shipping label. My breath caught. The sender's name was Caleb. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at his name printed in black ink. Hope is a strange, stubborn thing. You can starve it, ignore it, bury it, and somehow, it still finds a way to claw itself back to the surface. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I slit the packing tape with a kitchen knife. Inside, nestled in a bed of shredded paper, was a bottle. But it wasn't just any bottle. It was the Macallan 25. The dark amber liquid seemed to glow from within the elegant, heavy-bottomed glass. I knew enough to know this wasn't a casual gift. This was a statement. A bottle like this cost more than my first car. Tucked under the neck was a small, cream-colored card. I pulled it out. "Happy birthday, Dad. Hope you're well. Caleb." His handwriting was the same as it had always been, a messy, impatient scrawl, as if his hand couldn't keep up with his thoughts. I read the 4 short words over and over. "Hope you're well." It felt distant, impersonal, and the gift itself was a puzzle. A beautiful, expensive puzzle. Caleb knew I didn't drink anymore. Not a drop. My cardiologist had made that abundantly clear 3 years ago. Right after the heart scare that followed Martha's passing. "Theo, Doctor," Evans had said, his face serious. Your heart can't take the stress. Not anymore. Caleb had been there for that appointment. He'd heard the doctor's words. So what was this? A peace offering from a son who had forgotten the most important details of his father's life? Or was it something else, a test? Maybe. An invitation to fall back into old habits. The thought left a sour taste in my mouth. Just as I was trying to make sense of it all, a familiar. Cheerful knock echoed from the back door. Anybody home? Or is the birthday boy hiding from his adoring fans? Frank Miller let himself in, a wide grin on his face. Frank was my rock. He was Caleb's father-in-law, a good man who had become a better friend to me than my own son. He'd been there for me after Martha died, showing up with casseroles and a willingness to just sit in comfortable silence. "Frank, good to see you," I said, my voice a little rough. His eyes immediately landed on the bottle sitting on the island. He let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. Makalanchu gofem. Who are you trying to impress?" "Theo." "It's from Caleb," I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue. Frank's smile faltered for a second. He knew the whole story. He was caught in the middle of it. A bridge between two shores that refused to connect. "Well, that's something." He walked over, picking up the bottle with a reverence I rarely saw in the man. "This is the good stuff. The really good stuff." An idea formed in my mind. A simple, clean solution to a complicated problem. I wasn't going to drink it. Pouring it down the drain felt like a waste. An insult. But Frank would appreciate it. And it felt right. Turning a gift from my son into a gift for the man who had been more of a family to me lately. "You should take it, Frank," I said. He looked up, surprised. "What no?" "Theo, I couldn't. It's your birthday gift. And I'm giving it to you." I insisted. "You know I can't drink it. It would just sit on a shelf collecting dust. You'll actually enjoy it. Please. You deserve it more than I do." He hesitated, but he saw the sincerity in my eyes. He knew it was more than just a bottle of whiskey. It was me, trying to find a little bit of good in a confusing situation. "All right, Theo," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But you're coming over for a steak dinner this weekend. My treat. No arguments." "Deal," I said. And for the first time that day, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. After Frank left, the house felt quiet again. But it was a less lonely quiet. Then, the phone rang. I checked the caller ID. It was Caleb. My heart gave a little jump. Maybe the gift was just the start. Maybe this was the real peace offering. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep my voice even close. "Hey, Dad. Just calling to see if you got my package." His voice was tight, strained. I did. "Son, thank you. It was very generous." Good," he said quickly. "So, did you open it yet?" There was an odd urgency in his question, a pressure that made the hairs on my arm stand up. "I did," I said slowly. "It's a beautiful bottle." "Right. Yeah. It is." He paused, and I could hear him take a breath. "So, are you going to have a glass? To celebrate?" "Actually," I said. Frank Miller stopped by just after it arrived. He's a big fan of that particular brand. So I gave it to him. He was thrilled. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. I could hear nothing, not even a breath. It was a dead, heavy silence, filled with something I couldn't understand. "Caleb, are you still there?" "Yeah," he finally said. His voice had changed completely. The tension, the urgency, it was all gone. It was replaced by a strange, almost slick, sort of calm. "Oh, you gave it to Frank. That's great. Good for him. I'm glad he'll enjoy it." He sounded relieved. In fact, he sounded more than relieved. He sounded like a man who had just been told he'd won the lottery. Before I could ask him anything else, he made a quick excuse about a client calling and hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, the phone still in my hand. The conversation replayed in my head. The pressure in his voice before. The bizarre relief after. It didn't make sense. An engineer's mind looks for patterns, for logic. And there was no logic here. Just a deep, unsettling feeling that I was missing a critical piece of the puzzle. A few hours later, my world fell apart. The phone rang again. This time, it was Sophia, Caleb's wife and Frank's daughter. She was hysterical. I could barely understand her through the sobs. "Dad, Theo, it's Dad, it's my dad." "Sophia, slow down. What's wrong? What happened to Frank?" "He's in the hospital," she wailed. He collapsed. He was having a drink. A glass of that whiskey you gave him. And he couldn't breathe. The paramedics are saying they think it was his heart." The blood drained from my face. I felt cold. A deep, chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I mumbled something about being right there and hung up, my mind racing. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. But the image of that whiskey bottle and the memory of Caleb's strange, relieved voice flashed in my mind. It was a coincidence. It had to be. I spent the next few hours in the sterile, antiseptic-smelling waiting room of the emergency department. Sophia was inconsolable, and Caleb was there, trying to comfort her. But his eyes were shifty. He wouldn't look at me. The doctor finally came out and told us Frank was in critical condition. They weren't sure what had caused the sudden, severe cardiac event. They were running tests. I drove home late that night. My mind a chaotic storm of fear and suspicion. The house was dark and silent. Numbly, I went about the small task of tidying up. Anything to keep my hands and mind busy. I gathered the trash from the kitchen can to take it out to the curb. As I lifted the plastic bag, I heard a faint clink from the bottom. It sounded like glass hitting glass. That was odd. I hadn't thrown any glass away. Setting the bag on the floor, I untied the knot and reached inside. Pushing aside coffee grounds and vegetable peels, my fingers brushed against something small and hard. I pulled it out. It was a small glass vial, about the size of my thumb, with a black screw-on cap. It was empty. There was no label. I brought it closer to my nose and sniffed. There was a faint, almost almond-like chemical smell. And in that moment, in the dead quiet of my kitchen, a horrifying, unthinkable thought began to take shape. A thought so monstrous I could barely let myself form the words, "The whiskey wasn't a gift. It was a weapon, and my son had just missed his target." I stood there in the silent kitchen, the small glass vial cold against my palm. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the familiar lines of my home suddenly feeling alien and threatening. My mind, trained to solve problems and find logical sequences, was struggling to process the impossible. But the evidence was there, cold and hard in my hand. The gift. The strange phone call. Frank. Fighting for his life in a hospital bed. And now this. This little bottle that screamed of intent. Sleep was out of the question. I spent the rest of the night in my armchair. The vial sitting on the coffee table in front of me. A malevolent little chess piece. In a game I never wanted to play. I didn't move. I just watched the shadows lengthen and then recede as the first weak light of dawn bled through the windows. With the light came a sliver of clarity. A cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. I had to know for sure. The first thing I did was call the hospital. The nurse on duty was kind, but her update was grim. Frank's condition was unchanged. He was stable, but still critical. The words hung in the air long after I'd hung up the phone. Stable, but critical, just like my world. My next call was to Sophia. I told her I was going to stop by her house to pick up the glass Frank had been drinking from. The police might want to see it. I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. She agreed without question, her voice thick with exhaustion and grief. When I got to their house, Sophia's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. She handed me the glass, carefully wrapped in a kitchen towel. There's still a little bit left in the bottom, she whispered. I nodded, unable to meet her gaze for too long. The guilt of my suspicion, a heavy weight in my chest. This was her husband I was accusing, the father of her children. Back in my own kitchen, I carefully poured the remaining amber liquid, no more than a teaspoon's worth, from the heavy tumbler into a small, sterile jam jar I found in the pantry. I sealed it tightly. This was my only proof. As I was about to throw the empty trash bag from the previous night into the larger bin in the garage, a thought struck me. I stopped and looked inside the bag one more time, my hand searching for the spot where I'd found the vial. It was gone. A chill snaked its way up my spine. The bag had been in my kitchen all night. The only way the vial could be gone was if someone had come back into the house to retrieve it. Caleb. He must have realized his mistake. Realized he'd left a piece of evidence behind, and had come back while I was at the hospital. Hahadoki. He had let himself into my home, his childhood home, and had rifled through my trash to cover his tracks. The thought of his stealthy, treacherous presence in my house while I was gone made me feel physically ill. The last shred of doubt I might have been clinging to evaporated. This was real. I knew I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Not with just a gut feeling and a teaspoon of whiskey. They would call it a family dispute, a misunderstanding. I needed irrefutable, scientific proof. I needed Ben Carter. Ben and I had been friends since our college days at Ohio State. While I went into mechanical engineering, he'd pursued a brilliant career in chemistry, eventually becoming the head of the university's chemistry department. He was a man who believed in data, in facts, in the unassailable truth of a chemical analysis. I drove the 20 miles to the university, the small jar secured in the passenger seat like a volatile explosive. The campus was quiet. It being the tail end of summer break, I found Ben in his lab, a place that smelled of ozone and chalk dust, surrounded by a complex web of glass tubing and humming machinery. He looked up from a computer screen, his face breaking into a warm smile when he saw me. Theo, what a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? The warmth in his voice made what I was about to do feel even colder. Ben, I need your help, I said, my voice low. And I need you to be discreet. This can't leave this room. His smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. He gestured for me to sit. I didn't. I just walked over to his workbench and placed the jam jar on the clean, black surface. I told him everything. The estrangement from Caleb, the birthday gift, the phone call, Frank in the hospital, the vial in the trash, and its subsequent disappearance. I laid it all out, piece by piece, my voice flat and devoid of emotion, like an engineer reading a technical report. He listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on my face. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time. He picked up the jar, swirling the small amount of liquid inside. "You know what you're asking, Theo," he said softly. If you're right about this, he didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what it meant. "I need to know." "Ben," I said, "I have to know the truth." He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll run it through the gas chromatograph and mass spectrometer. If there's anything in here that shouldn't be, we'll find it. It will take a couple of days. I'll call you as soon as I have anything." Leaving the lab, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching myself in a movie. The next step was the one I dreaded most. I had to face him. I needed to look my son in the eye and see the lie for myself. I drove to his house, a tidy suburban colonial that Martha and I had helped him and Sophia put a down payment on. My phone was in my jacket pocket, the voice recorder app already running. In Ohio, it's legal to record a conversation as long as one party consents, and I was giving myself consent. Sophia opened the door. She looked surprised to see me. "Theo, is everything okay? Is there news about Dad?" "No. No change," I said gently. "Is Caleb here? I need to talk to him for a minute." Caleb appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He had a practiced look of concern on his face, but his eyes darted around, never quite settling on mine. "Dad, what's up?" "I was just at the hospital," I said, stepping inside. "The doctors are still confused. They mentioned it could have been some kind of rare, aggressive virus." I was feeding him the line he'd used before, watching for his reaction. He latched onto it immediately. "See, that's what I said. It's terrible. Just terrible. Poor Frank." He shook his head. The perfect picture of a worried son-in-law. It was a masterful performance. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke again. "Caleb," I said, my voice calm and even, "that bottle of whiskey you sent me, where did you buy it?" A flicker of something panic maybe crossed his face before he could mask it. "Oh. Ooh. Online. I think. One of those specialty liquor sites. Why?" "I was just curious," I said, holding his gaze. "I couldn't find it in any of the local stores. Do you remember the name of the website?" "No. Not off the top of my head. It was a while ago," he said, turning away, busying himself by straightening a stack of mail on the entryway table. He was lying. I could see it in the tense set of his shoulders, in the way he refused to look at me. I took a step closer. "Son, do you have any idea why I'm asking you these questions?" He froze. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, his back to me, perfectly still. The silence in the room was deafening. It was filled with everything he wasn't saying. It was a confession, louder than any words could ever be. He knew exactly what was in that bottle. And he knew that I was starting to figure it out. After what felt like an eternity, he finally turned, his face a pale, blank mask. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Dad," he said, his voice flat. But his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a trapped animal. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the phone to ring. I visited Frank at the hospital, sitting by his bedside, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, a silent promise forming in my heart that I would see this through. I would get justice for him. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Ben. His voice was grim, stripped of its usual warmth. "Theo," he said, "you need to sit down." I was already sitting. "Just tell me." "Ben." "The sample you gave me," he said, his voice heavy. "It's positive for a toxic alkaloid, specifically tremetone. It's the primary toxin found in Ageratina altissima." The scientific name meant nothing to me. "In English?" "Ben." "What is it?" "It's more commonly known as white snakeroot," he said. "It's a plant, highly poisonous. It disrupts cellular respiration. In concentrated doses, it causes tremors, vomiting, and eventually cardiac arrest." The world went quiet. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It was true. All of it. My son, my own flesh and blood, had tried to poison me. The grief hit me then. A physical blow that knocked the air from my lungs. It was a deep, guttural sorrow for the little boy in the photograph, for the man he could have been, and for the monster he had become. But beneath the grief, the cold, hard resolve began to solidify, turning from ice into steel. This was no longer just a suspicion, it was a fact. A scientific, undeniable fact. I thanked Ben, my voice a hoarse whisper, and hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, the engineer in me taking over. I had the means. I had the opportunity. I had a recording of his lies. And now, thanks to Ben, I had the proof. The pieces were all there. I knew what I had to do next. I drove down to the Maple Creek police station, a simple brick building I'd driven past 1,000 times without a second thought. I walked through the glass doors, the air smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant. I walked up to the front desk and asked to speak with a detective. I was led to a small, cluttered office where a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun looked up from her computer. "I'm Detective Isabella Rossi," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. "How can I help you?" I sat down in the chair opposite her desk. I took a deep breath. I placed the printed lab report from Ben on her desk. Then I placed my phone next to it. "Detective," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I believe my son, Caleb, tried to murder me, and in the process, he may have murdered his father-in-law." Detective Rossi looked from the report to the phone, and then to my face. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held mine. She didn't dismiss me. She didn't tell me it was a family matter. She just listened. A silent, focused intensity in her gaze. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice low and serious. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Detective Rossi's office was a testament to organized chaos. Stacks of files threatened to avalanche onto the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and strong coffee. She didn't say a word as she read Ben's lab report, her expression unreadable. Then, she picked up my phone and listened to the entire recording of my conversation with Caleb. Her eyes closed in concentration. When it was over, she placed the phone back on the desk with a soft click. She leaned back in her chair, the leather groaning in protest, and steepled her fingers, studying me. "You've brought me a solid case, Mr. Hayes. A very solid case. We have the means, a confirmed poison. We have opportunity. He sent the package. We have a recording that, while not a confession, shows a clear pattern of deception and guilty knowledge." "So you'll arrest him?" I asked, a sliver of relief cutting through the tension. "Not yet," she said, and the relief vanished. A good defense attorney would tear this apart. They'd say it's circumstantial. They'd paint you as a grieving, paranoid father lashing out at his estranged son. What we're missing, what a jury always needs to see, is motive. Why would a successful real estate agent try to kill his own father? The question hung in the air between us. I had no answer. "I don't know," I admitted, the words tasting like failure. "We haven't been close. There were disagreements about money after Martha passed. But nothing like this. That's where we need to push," Rosie said, leaning forward, her eyes sharp and focused. "If this is about money, we need to make him think the money is about to disappear. We need to squeeze him. We need to make him panic. Panicked people make mistakes." And so, in that cluttered little office, we laid out the plan. It was a cold, calculated piece of engineering, designed to exploit my son's weaknesses. My role was simple. I was to be the bait. The next morning, I went to the hospital. Frank was awake, his color better. Though he was still weak, he was hooked up to a web of tubes and monitors that beeped and whirred softly. A quiet symphony of survival. He managed a weak smile when he saw me. "Hey, Theo," he rasped. "Hey, yourself," I said, pulling a chair close to his bed. "You gave us all a scare." "Tell me about it," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "1 minute I'm enjoying the best damn whiskey I've ever tasted. The next I'm seeing a white light." He paused, his eyes finding mine. "That boy of yours, Caleb, he always thought I was sitting on a pile of money. You know, because I owned my own construction business, he never understood that I put it all into Sophia's house, into the kids' college funds. He sees dollar signs where there are just people." The comment hit me like a physical blow. It was the first piece of the puzzle, the first hint of the why. Caleb saw the world through a lens of financial gain. He saw his father-in-law not as a man, but as an asset. And me, he must have seen me the same way. Leaving the hospital, I sat in my car for a long time, in the engine off. Then I took out my phone and made the first call. I dialed my lawyer, a man named George, who had handled my affairs for 30 years. "George, it's Theo Hayes," I said, pitching my voice a little louder than necessary, as if I were an old man who was hard of hearing. "I need to make some immediate changes to my will." "Yes, immediate. I want to liquidate some assets and set up a new trust. A significant one. It's for Frank Miller's ongoing medical care, whatever he needs. For as long as he needs it. The rest, well, let's just say I'm rethinking my legacy. I'm thinking of the hospital's cardiac wing, a charitable donation. Yes, the bulk of the estate. Let's meet tomorrow to finalize the paperwork." The second call was easier and crueler. I called my cousin, Sarah, a woman whose love for gossip was matched only by her inability to keep a secret. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes before I steered the conversation where I needed it to go. "It's just been so stressful." "Sarah," I sighed, putting a tremor in my voice. With Frank in the hospital, the bills are going to be astronomical. I'm doing what I can. Of course. In fact, I'm changing my will to make sure he's taken care of. A man finds out who's really important at a time like this. You know, I've decided the rest of my estate should go to people and causes that deserve it. People who value life over, well, over other things. I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that the contents of that conversation would reach Caleb before the day was out. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait. The first tremor came late that afternoon. It was a call from Sophia. She sounded frantic. "Theo, I'm sorry to bother you. But is everything okay?" Caleb came home for lunch and he's acting so strangely. He's been on his computer for hours, looking at banking websites, pacing around the house. He keeps muttering about wills and charities. Did something happen? Just getting my affairs in order. "Honey," I said, my voice gentle, betraying none of the cold calculation I felt inside. An old man's prerogative. The bait was in the water, and the fish was circling. The bite came just after 7 o'clock that evening. The caller ID flashed Caleb's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep, steadying breath. "Dad," his voice was tight, strained with a false layer of concern. "Sophia said you were talking to Cousin Sarah. She said you were changing things. Your will. I wanted to make sure you were okay. You're not sick, are you?" "I'm fine." "Caleb," I said, my voice flat. Never been clearer. In fact. "Okay. Good. That's good," he said, relief evident in his tone. Then he got to the point. "It's just, Dad, I don't think you should be making any big financial decisions right now. You're under a lot of stress. People can take advantage of you when you're emotional. The only person I feel emotional about right now is Frank," I said, letting a hard edge creep into my voice. "The man is lying in a hospital bed because of a terrible incident. I'm going to make sure he has the best care money can buy. My money." I emphasized the last 2 words. There was a pause. I could hear his breathing. Quick and shallow. "Of course. Of course. Frank is the priority," he said, his voice starting to lose its calm facade. "But Dad, you have to think about family, too. About your legacy. About your granddaughter." "I am thinking about my legacy, Caleb," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm thinking about what kind of man I want to be remembered as." That's when he broke. The carefully constructed mask of the concerned son shattered, and the raw, desperate greed underneath came roaring to the surface. "You can't do this," he hissed, his voice tight with fury. "That's my money. That house? Those investments. That's my inheritance. You owe me that. After everything, you owe me." The words hung in the air. A rough, ugly confession of entitlement. It was all there. The motive, the rage, the chilling belief that my life, my assets, were nothing more than a future payday for him. "The only thing I owe anyone," I said, my voice as cold as ice, "is the truth." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from a profound and soul-crushing sadness. The recording of the call was automatically forwarded to a secure email address I had set up for Detective Rossi. The vice was tightening. There was one last thing I had to do. Perhaps the hardest thing of all. I drove to Sophia's house. I needed to see her, to warn her. Before the storm broke, she let me in, her face etched with worry. Caleb wasn't home. Sophia, I began, my heart aching for the pain I was about to cause her. We need to talk. It's about the whiskey. I didn't play her the recording of her husband's venomous rant. I didn't tell her about the will or the trap. I just slid the lab report from Ben across the kitchen table. She picked it up, her brow furrowed in confusion as she read the scientific terms. I don't understand, she said, looking up at me. What is Ageratina altissima? It's a poison. Honey, I said softly. A potent one. It was in the whiskey. Someone put it there. The color drained from her face as the implication hit her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape from the horrible truth that was closing in on her. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake. But we both knew it wasn't. I saw the moment the denial crumbled, the moment she understood that the man she loved, the father of her children, had tried to kill her father. Her face crumpled, and a sob tore from her throat. A sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. I stayed with her until her mother arrived. My own grief, a silent, heavy companion to hers. The final call came just as I was pulling into my own driveway. It was Detective Rossi. Her voice was all business. We got it. Theo, she said. The recording was exactly what we needed. We ran a full financial check on Caleb this afternoon. He's over $150,000 in debt to various online gambling sites. He's been losing for months. His disparity. There it was. The motive. Ugly, pathetic, and deadly. We have enough now, she continued, her voice steady and clear. The D.A. has signed off. The arrest warrant is active. She paused for a beat. We're moving in tonight. It's over. It's over. The two words from Detective Rossi echoed in the profound silence of my car. I hung up the phone, but the silence remained, pressing in on me. It wasn't the triumphant end of a battle. There was no surge of adrenaline, no feeling of victory. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. The engineer in me had solved the problem, followed the logic to its inevitable conclusion. The father in me was attending a funeral for a son who was still breathing. I didn't drive past Caleb's house. I had no desire to see the flashing blue and red lights painting his neighbor's windows. No desire to be a spectator at the public dismantling of my own family. That was a spectacle for strangers. My grief was a private affair. I went home. The house was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked to the living room and sank into my old armchair. The one Martha always said molded perfectly to the shape of my worries. I sat there for hours, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across the walls, phantom ghosts in the quiet dark. Every sound from the street, a distant siren. A dog barking made me muscles tense. I thought of Caleb. Not the man who had plotted to kill me, but the boy who used to fall asleep on this very chair, his small hand curled around my finger. I thought of the promises I had made to him when he was born. Promises of safety and love that now felt like bitter, broken lies. The plan, the trap, the righteous anger, it had all felt so clear, so necessary. But in the silence of this night, all I felt was the crushing weight of the outcome. I had won, and I had lost everything. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that felt fundamentally changed. The birds still sang, The newspaper still landed on the driveway with a soft thud. But the order of my universe had been fractured. Just after 9, Detective Rossi came to my house. She looked tired. Her professional demeanor softened by a hint of compassion. She sat at my kitchen table and accepted a cup of black coffee. "It's done," she said, her voice low. "He was taken into custody last night. There was no incident." I just nodded, stirring my own coffee, the spoon making a small, rhythmic clinking sound against the ceramic. He was completely surprised. She continued, looking into her mug. He was in his home office, on the phone, arguing with someone. Sounded like a bookie. When he saw us, all the color drained from his face. He didn't fight, didn't argue. He just deflated. She paused, then looked up at me. "Do you want to know what he said?" I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded again. He looked right at my partner. She said, and he whispered, My dad did this to me. Not, I'm innocent. Not, you have the wrong man." He knew exactly how the pieces had fallen into place. He knew you had outmaneuvered him. There it was, the final, damning confirmation. He wasn't just a murderer in action, he was a victim in his own mind, incapable of seeing the wreckage he himself had created. The last stubborn ember of hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding finally flickered and died, leaving nothing but cold ash. A few days later, Sophia came to see me. I dreaded this meeting more than any other part of the ordeal. I expected tears, accusations, a desperate plea for me to undo what I had done. But the woman who stood on my doorstep was not the hysterical, grieving wife I had last seen. She was pale and thin, the light in her eyes dim, but she was composed, a survivor. We sat in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken grief. "I'm taking the children back to Pennsylvania," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "To be with my mom. There's nothing for us here anymore." "I understand," I said, my own voice a hoarse whisper. She looked at me then, her gaze direct and unflinching. "I'm not here to blame you. Theo, I want to thank you." The words stunned me into silence. "You didn't just save my father's life," she continued, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You saved us. You saved my children from growing up with a monster they thought was a hero. It's a terrible, ugly truth, but it's the truth, and we can't start to heal without it." She stood up to leave. At the door, she paused. "He's asked to see me." "I'm not going. I don't think I'll ever see him again." She looked at me one last time. "Goodbye, Theo." And then she was gone, taking with her the last vestiges of the family I once had. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine. I gave my formal statement, sitting in a sterile, windowless room, recounting the story over and over again. They played the recordings for me. The first one, where Caleb's heavy, guilty silence had been his first confession. The second, where his voice, twisted with rage and entitlement, had become the nail in his own coffin. Hearing them again, in the cold, official light of a police investigation, stripped them of their emotional power. They were no longer the sounds of a father's heartbreak. They were simply evidence, exhibits A and B. Months crawled by. The trial was a surreal experience. I sat in the courtroom every day, a silent observer. Caleb sat at the defendant's table, flanked by a public defender who looked perpetually exhausted. My son was a stranger to me now. He was thinner. His skin had a grayish pallor. And the arrogant confidence he had always worn like a well-tailored suit was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He never looked at me. Not once. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and set. I watched the foreman hand the verdict to the bailiff. I watched the judge read it. I heard the word guilty echo through the silent courtroom. There was no gasp from the gallery. No outburst from Caleb. There was only a profound, heavy silence. I felt no joy. No sense of victory. I just felt the quiet, irreversible finality of a steel door clanging shut. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The seasons changed. The leaves on the maple tree in my front yard turned from green to a brilliant, fiery red, then fell, leaving the branches bare against the winter sky. Frank made a full recovery. He came over one Sunday afternoon in the spring. We didn't talk about the trial, about Caleb, about any of it. We sat on the back porch, the way we had 100 times before, watching the robins search for worms in the damp soil. He put his hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and steady. "You did the right thing, Theo," he said, his voice quiet. "You did the right thing for everyone." It wasn't forgiveness, because I hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't praise. It was just acknowledgement. A simple statement of fact from a good man. And it was the closest thing to peace I had felt in over a year. I went back to my workshop. The smell of cedar and sawdust was a comfort, a connection to a time before the world had fractured. In the corner, covered by a dusty sheet, was the rocking horse I had been building for my granddaughter. It was finished, its polished wood gleaming in the dim light. It was a beautiful thing, made with love and precision, and I had nowhere to send it. It was a perfect, painful monument to all that had been lost. I ran my hand over its smooth, curved head. Justice doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a reckoning. It's the process of balancing a scale that has been violently tipped. You can restore the equilibrium, but you can never erase the memory of the fall. Now, most evenings, Frank and I sit on the porch. We drink iced tea. We talk about baseball, about the trouble with modern cars, about the right way to grow tomatoes. We watch the sun set, painting the Ohio sky in shades of orange and purple. The fight is over. The silence in my house is different now. It's no longer the silence of absence. The heavy, suffocating silence Martha and Caleb left behind. It's a new silence. It's the silence of acceptance. The silence of a quiet life. Rebuilt, piece by piece, from the wreckage of the old one. It's the silence of peace.